guys, I've been doing something incredibly stupid. I've been out on some forums looking for what people think about MIDI guitar. So I came across this thread called The Sad State of MIDI Guitar in 2023, and I wish I could say that I disagree with all of the postings there, but I don't actually. The only thing that makes a difference in this case is the fact that I have been lucky enough to be involved in trying out MIDI Guitar 3, the next generation of this software. So all the points on how the hardware isn't good enough and stuff like this, I can't say I disagree in any way. All in all, I would agree that it is a sad state had I not worked with Jam Origin trying out this software myself. So this is an excellent chance for me to sort of display some of the properties that it will have, answering some of the misgivings that the guys in the forum actually have. I'll be going over questions on sustain, and I will go over questions on tracking, of course, but mostly it will all come down to two questions, I think. The first being, why use MIDI guitar over any other kind of controller to begin with? And my answer will be phrasing. The other big question that I'm interested in answering is then, why use MPE? This time it's polyphonic phrasing. Just to set the stage for this discussion, we have the first poster and thread maker, Mr. Locust Tree. He's interested in a MIDI guitar controller for composing purposes. So he's interested in stuff like I'm interested in, sketching, I guess, perhaps making bigger parts all at once. So MPE will be interesting since the polyphonic part is very much at the heart of that stuff. His misgivings here in the beginning are with string decay. We're going to talk about sustain in this video, and the specifics of the pitch to MIDI issues. And that's, I guess, latency and tracking. So those three things are going to be the main part of this discussion. This is somewhere in the beginning of this thread. MIDI guitars always seemed like a clumsy compromise to me, taking a very dynamic and controllable interface and severely reducing its playability. Perhaps I don't agree with this guy on his statement that it's a very dynamic and controllable interface, the guitar in itself, because albeit it's dynamic if you use it right, controllable, sure, but not in this environment especially often. I mean, all those imperfections that you sort of can live with when you use the instrument as an acoustic instrument are really causing havoc on the MIDI output. You get double notes if you have a note that's sort of muted and starts to ring again. You can probably get into trouble even with the most well-tuned guitar, stretching too much for a hard to reach chord, pressing down a bit weirdly, getting the guitar out of tune and having notes beat into each other in a very unpleasant way. And this all have to do with the physical nature of the guitar as a controller. And this also leads into another question that is interesting. This guy actually speaks on this. Maybe with more MPE and poly aftertouch synths and controllers now, it could be better, but it's a chicken and egg problem where most MIDI guitars have kind of sucked. If the guys who are developing these instruments don't have a hardware controller to aim for, to look at, to see what should we try to implement, what kind of gestures are we supposed to be taking into consideration, they will develop instruments for the existing controllers. So we will have libraries for the Rolly C board, the Osmos, or for the Hawken Continuum. But as long as we don't have any great MPE or MIDI controller guitars, it will be up to us to sort of find the working software instruments to begin with, to go back to the developers and say, okay, this perhaps doesn't work that well. Could you amend that, or could you change something here with this sort of property so that this will work? This interplay will have to go on for a while, I think. I would hope that most instruments that are written, like MPE instruments, for instance, are written for all kinds of MPE controllers, like audio modeling does with the SWAM instruments. You have a variety of presets for different controllers coming with those instruments. Exactly like I would hope to get any sort of instrument. Scroll down a list of presets for different controllers and gets at least some sort of default MIDI guitar controller preset to begin with. That scenario is a few weeks away, I guess. So if we go to the next guy, he has problems with some limitations in the actual hardware that is of today. Don't have any long sustained notes, and the sustained notes could be a problem for a real guitar controller. They're intended to sort of send signals as long as the notes are ringing, and you get these curves where the volume is tapering off as the note stops ringing. And if that's the only alternative you get, in the end it's going to be quite boring to have every instrument have the same dynamic profile as a string that's tapering off, right? So in MIDI Guitar 3, there are lots and lots of possibilities to modulate the velocity curves, sustaining notes way beyond these 10 seconds. Most users won't need anything like a breath controller anymore, since those possibilities of sustaining notes are there in the software already. He seems to think that prolonging the notes beyond 10 seconds is the only way to solve another problem that he has. And he says that this is why you never really see clips of guys playing really long evolving synth pads. I just can't see a sustain pedal solving that problem, since it acts on all notes at once. Thank you for that invite. Exactly this problem is solved in MIDI Guitar 3 by having 3 channels. It's called chains in MIDI Guitar 3. So you can have a patch with 2 synths, one that you're controlling with the sustain pedal playing over, so you have this hold effect on the synth. I'll have an example of this. I'm playing the UVI Diva and the SWAM sax over that. I'm actually controlling the background, just striking chord, pressing my pedal, and I'm soloing with the sax over that, letting go of the pedal, striking new chord, pressing down, and so on. With regard to that specific wish, I would say mission completed. That is not a problem for MIDI Guitar 3, and I don't really think it's a problem for any of the software solutions, and shouldn't be for the hardware either. But before leaving this sustain thing as a problem solved, let's speak of those suggestions that are coming up in this thread. We have Mr. Zero Crossing here, who says that, I imagine you could overcome the sustain problem with the Sustainiac. It did help with the yodeling issues when a string fades beyond the pickup's ability to make sense of it. Yeah, so this is my Adrian Belew inspired Ibanez 420 GK guitar. You have these 13-pin pickups system from the beginning, and I've retrofitted this with a Sustainiac as well. This works with those modeled sounds that you can use in the VG99, but as soon as you try to use the MIDI out, it fails miserably because of the poor quality of the MIDI out from the Roland stuff. And even if the Sustainiac was a solution to getting rid of this sustain problem for that kind of setup, you still have the problem with the poor quality of MIDI out from the Roland stuff. So that's my main reason for not even trying to use this anymore. This is one of the setups that I've tried to extend sustain with some sort of artificial maneuver on it. The other one, of course, also discussed later on in the thread, is the Moog Guitar. This is retrofitted with a 13-pin system, also discussed in this thread. This doesn't work for other reasons. There's so much interference with this kind of guitar depending on how it's built. You have so much wiring inside of this that you can't get a decent pitch to noise ratio working here using this for any sort of MIDI setup. So I've tried this, and I can't recommend this setup for MIDI at all, sorry to say. Have you actually tried to play a synth guitar? It's not intuitive. None of the little things that make up good expressive guitar playing, like string rakes, for instance, translates to your average synth patch. And this is a really good point, and it touches on what I've been talking about earlier. Yeah, it doesn't really, because developers haven't really had the chance to write an instrument that will be able to be used in that way. This is what it can sound like. The guitar and bass you just heard was a UVI sound pack from the Joue Pro player, and that's an MPE player that's not keyboard specific, so I wasn't all that surprised to find that it worked really well for MIDI guitar as well. I've taken upon myself to give you an introduction to the new MPE patches of Falcon here. These are new as of yesterday, I think. You see that they play really well with bends. It's not a hot mess, everything. It's perfectly usable stuff. And now I'm not even using CC74 that much. I have something coming in on it, but it's actually not modulating too hard. So these are standard sounds ready and waiting to be used. For me, it's the stuff like the polyphonic bends that really makes the difference. And now I'm just playing the MPE presets from Falcon because I have Falcon open in MIDI Guitar 3 as an MPE instrument, as every instrument is opened by default. I can of course use any kind of VSTs for my patches in MIDI Guitar 3. It doesn't matter if it's old school legacy MIDI 1.0 together with an MPE patch on another chain. These work perfectly fine together. But one thing that I've realized is I can also actually make some of the old school instruments work as MPE instruments with an MPE wrapper. In the next clip here, I'll use the guitar from before, this guitar in, I used the Joue guitar from within Falcon, but I'm also using Native Instruments Valves Pro. This is the new brass library that they have, and it's a beautiful library, and you really don't need MPE on it. Although I prefer to have MPE. I introduce some sort of small dissonances in that my guitar isn't perfectly in tune. It sounds way more human, and I think that's the beauty of playing some of these bigger libraries with guitar instead of hammering it out on a keyboard, that it's perfectly in tune all the time. So every sort of switch, it becomes so much more mechanical with a keyboard. Whereas if you get these small imperfections, not to beat into each other, but instead work together and form these shimmering effects that it actually has in a brass section, it's really something else. So So with that, I would like to say that I think that the problem of raking is at least solvable. I think that next generation instruments have these properties that makes it possible for us to sort of convey also imperfections where we want them. And here is where I say use the MIDI guitar for the places where you would like to introduce a bit of these imperfections to get some nerve into the music, you know. Let's not leave our friend here with the rakes just yet. He segues into the question of tracking as well. And he's talking about Robert Fripp and synth guitars in the 80s and tracking that sounded really well. He has already what I think is the solution here himself. It just might be that Robert Fripp is really good at altering his technique enough to get those guitars to cooperate, and I think that's spot on. I also found some quotes by John McLaughlin talking about synclavier and stuff like this. I mean, he's talking about it as a revolution in a guitar player article, I think it is. Somebody's asking here that one of the main criticisms of synthesizer guitars is that they don't track accurately or quite fast enough for guitarists' taste. And John says that perhaps players are asking too much and aren't willing to modify the technique. The nature of translating a guitar envelope, the characteristics of the sound into digital information is very complex and sensitive. There's some sort of unwillingness to giving yourself up to a new medium. Your guitar is not the same guitar when you use it together with either a hexaphonic pickup into whatever you're using, or like with a MIDI Guitar 3 or 2, you have to reevaluate and recalibrate. Take your time feeling it out. What's possible, what's not possible, instead of start raking and be frustrated by the things you can't do. You can always push some sort of software to its breaking point. You can find some bottleneck somewhere and push it to the breaking point through that. It's exactly the same with the next generation hardware as well. Let's get back to the tracking stuff. The tracking is going to be good in MIDI Guitar 3. It's not always a question of how fast it is. Is it fast enough together with these other qualities like the MPE. In my case, I look at the dynamics and I feel that I get way better control over the dynamics with MIDI Guitar 2 and 3 than I do with trying the triple play or the roll and stuff, but that could be me. I would be most interested to hear what you guys have to say on this, because the dynamics part is a big part for why I'm not using those systems anymore. I felt it was flat and cold. So comment section is open. Bash me if you want to. If you guys want to comment on your journey and tell me what's the best setup you have, I would love to hear about it. There's also this suggestion here. Guitar as a synth controller will always have different advantages and disadvantages versus keyboards. That's why it's good we have both. I couldn't agree more. This is why I'm using both keyboards, C-boards, I have breath controllers, I have wind controller instruments, and I have MIDI guitars. But for my sake, MIDI guitars are taking over more the things that has to do with organic sounds, that has to do with sounds that I'm shaping while playing. And especially so those sounds that I'm shaping while playing that are polyphonic. It hasn't been that way, but it is so now. And this is due to the new software that I hope that you guys get to play very soon. So talk to you later. Bye.